Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey into something so ordinary, so quietly ever-present, that you've probably never thought twice about it, until now. Imagine the dry rasp of a tool gliding across rough stone, your fingers blackened with soot, the flicker of firelight casting cave wall drawings into motion. You're surrounded by silence, save for the scratch-scratch of history being born. Not with ink or code, but with burnt wood. You're not holding a pencil yet, not exactly, but you are feeling the first itch to make a mark. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in from somewhere far-flung, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where in the world we're drifting off together from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch in the cool stillness of a Paleolithic cave, your breath mingling with the scent of damp stone and ancient fire. It's 30,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries, and someone very much like you is drawing an animal on the wall. Not because it's homework, not because they've run out of TikToks to scroll, but because they need to. They feel compelled. Maybe it's magic, maybe it's memory, but they dip their fingers in a slurry of charcoal and spit and begin to draw. Historians still argue whether these cave markings were ritualistic, instructional, or just early doodles born of boredom and wonder. But what's clear is that they weren't made with brushes or pens. They were made with carbon, burnt wood, crushed and smeared, the raw ancestor of graphite. You trace your own line beside theirs. A horse, a human, a half fish, half mystery. The walls are alive with expression, and the material, black, crumbly, staining your skin, feels almost alive too. Early humans likely used firewood remnants, maybe even charred bone or manganese oxide, depending on the region. Whatever they grabbed, it had one thing in common. It left a mark. And in a sense, that's what the pencil would always be about. You shuffle forward a few millennia and squint into the sandy brightness of ancient Egypt. People are writing now for real. Papyrus scrolls, ledgers, spells. They're using reed pens, sliced to points, dipped in ink. Messy, precise, impermanent. But if you look closely, you'll still see hints of the older methods. Scribes carrying small cakes of charcoal for shading, planning, outlining. Then, over in Mesopotamia, a scribe's stylus presses neat wedges into clay tablets. Sharp, deliberate, baked in fire. It's nothing like a pencil. And yet, there's something pencil-y in the impulse. A stylus may be for indenting, not marking, but the pressure, the control, the physical intimacy of hand to writing surface, it all feels familiar. By the time the Romans roll into town with their wax tablets and bronze styli, you can practically hear the pencil tapping on history's shoulder, whispering, "Soon." Now, picture this. You're walking through the dusty remains of a Roman schoolroom, probably not unlike your own, minus the Wi-Fi and vending machines. Kids are hunched over tablets, not digital ones, but actual slabs of wax, scribbling with styluses and then smoothing the wax flat to erase it. It's a little like writing on a frozen lake with a stick and then melting the whole thing when you're done. Delightfully analog, but it's not quite enough. So we jump forward again, and here's where it gets good. You're now in a wind-blown valley in northern England. The year is somewhere around 1560, and a storm has just knocked down a tree. Seems uneventful, until shepherds notice something glittering beneath the roots. Not gold, not silver, but a strange, heavy, greasy-looking black stone. They try burning it. Doesn't burn. They try carving with it. That works. Clean, dark marks on paper, wood, sheep tags. No ink required. No dipping. Just draw. Just write. This, though no one knows it yet, is the moment the pencil is born. Not invented, but revealed. Historians debate whether this first large deposit of pure graphite, found in Borrowdale, Cumbria, was stumbled upon earlier or later. Some say it was known to local communities even earlier but only gained prominence when its commercial value was realized. Others point to mining records from the Elizabethan era that mention this mysterious plumbago, literally, lead-like stuff. Spoiler, it's not lead. Never was. But we're gonna call it lead for centuries anyway. because why let facts get in the way of tradition? Anyway, you're now hunched with a handful of 16th century tinkerers. They're carving sticks of graphite into little writing wands. Some wrap them in string. Some stuff them into wooden casings, crudely at first, but the idea sticks. Soon, the smudgy black wand becomes a tool of scribes, artists, and thinkers. People carry them around like secrets in their pockets. Dry, portable, reliable. One fun little fringe fact: people thought graphite was medicinal. No, really. Some 17th century apothecaries sold powdered graphite to treat, well, just about everything. If your stomach ached, your head pounded, or your mood soured, a little sprinkle of this dark dust was the cure. Spoiler again, it wasn't. But hey, who among us hasn't chewed a pencil in a moment of anxiety and called it therapy? The line between writing and healing, between drawing and dreaming, it blurs more than you'd think. And still, we're not done. The earliest pencils weren't always safe to use. Because of the whole lead mislabeling, people panicked. Even today, parents will whisper, "Don't eat the pencil," as if a light snack of graphite would send you spiraling. Rest assured, modern pencils contain zero lead. They're made from graphite mixed with clay, encased in wood. The only thing you risk from nibbling a number 2 is social embarrassment. But back then, the rumors swirled. Some even believed pencils could transmit thoughts. Not in a magical sense, but in a kind of proto-telepathy. If you wrote something, someone else could read it and instantly know what you meant. Spooky. So here you are, curled up with your stubby graphite stick, watching the candlelight flicker across its shiny surface. It smells earthy, a little like fire, a little like stone. And you know something that Shepherd didn't. This is just the beginning. You step away from the rainy English hills and duck into a sunlit corridor lined with stone columns. The air grows warmer, drier. Dust curls lazily through shafts of light. You're now in ancient Egypt, and while you might still have a smudge of graphite on your fingertips from Borrowdale, you'll need to put it away for now. This world writes differently. In your hand is a reed pen, cut to a point, dipped into a pot of black ink made from soot and gum arabic. It squeaks slightly against the papyrus, each stroke demanding care. You write right to left, the symbols curling like rivers and birds. This is a different kind of pencil ancestor. Not about pressure, but about flow. Not about dry marks, but about wet ones. But if you listen carefully to the whispers of history, you'll hear the pencil lurking even here. Some artisans carry small cakes of charcoal to sketch outlines before committing to ink. The Egyptians also used crushed minerals, ground and bound with animal fat, to paint. Substances not unlike graphite, though more colorful and ceremonial. Artists and priests passed down mixtures and smudge techniques. No rubber erasers yet, of course, just a damp finger or the back of a knife. Across the Mediterranean, in Greece and Rome, things sharpened further. Literally. You find yourself in a Roman schoolroom again, but this time you're focused on the stylus. It's bronze or bone or sometimes iron, narrow and pointed. It scrapes into wax tablets, leaving temporary indentations like a writing ghost. When you're done, you flip the stylus and smooth the wax flat with the blunt end. It's the earliest form of delete. No confirmation dialog box needed. There's a certain satisfaction in the scratch-scratch of stylus on wax. You press a little harder to emphasize a word, like boldface before boldface existed. The wax smells faintly of honey and heat. And just like your future pencil, the stylus invites fidgeting, doodling, margin notes that whisper across centuries. Historians still argue whether the stylus was a genuine writing revolution or merely a convenience for the literate elite. But what's clear is that it put writing, manual, physical writing, into everyday hands. And for the first time, students could really make mistakes. Joyfully, messily, erasably. You follow a scribe into a bustling Roman forum. He's got a wooden case strapped to his belt, a little kit of styli, maybe a scroll or two. He dips occasionally into a pot of ink, too, because Romans are multitaskers like that. Ink for scrolls, stylus for tablets, charcoal for sketches. You feel the pencil trying to burst into this moment, but it isn't quite time. One fringe detail: Roman scribes occasionally used a strange tool called a graphium. Yes, it's where graphite eventually gets its name. The graphium might have had a metallic tip, useful for delicate wax impressions or fine-point illustrations. It wasn't mass-produced, but it was clever. Some of them even folded like pocket knives. Ancient fidget tools with writing ambitions. You glance at your own hands and realize something curious. We've always wanted tools that help us think. Not just record, but ideate, dream, visualize. Whether it's carving a tally into bone or sketching a plan for a bathhouse, the line between tool and mind is often blurry. So you drift forward again, centuries passing in a haze of parchment and vellum. The Middle Ages, despite their reputation for gloom, give rise to monastic scribes who write with quill pens, candle wax, and quiet devotion. Marginalia begin to appear. Tiny doodles, notes, sometimes inappropriate jokes. If they'd had pencils, those monks would have been even more dangerous. You picture a scribe, hunched over a Bible, muttering Latin under his breath. He pauses, pulls a bit of charcoal from his robe, sketches a face in the corner, then quickly erases it with a damp cloth and returns to God's word. The impulse to mark and unmark is eternal. And while graphite hasn't taken center stage again just yet, it's getting closer. In Renaissance Italy, Leonardo da Vinci experiments with silver point and chalk, but he also dabbles with black carbon sticks. Artists across Europe begin using drawing leads, basically sticks of raw graphite or charcoal, sometimes encased in holders, sometimes wrapped in string or paper. If you've ever used a Conti crayon, you've held something very similar. But the problem remains. These early tools are fragile, messy, and inconsistent. You either snap them, smudge them, or lose them. What people want is something strong, portable, reliable. And you know what's just around the corner. A fun tidbit before we go. In 14th century China, artists were already using graphite in inkstones, grinding it with water and mixing it with glue to create soft, rich washes. While Western Europe struggled to tame the mineral, the East was already dancing with it. Still, you return to the West, to the scratch of styluses, the ink-stained fingers of monks, the smudge of charcoal behind canvas. You feel the yearning in these hands, wanting something simple, something you can hold without mess, erase without flame, carry without leaking. And then, like a whisper from that cave long ago, you hear it. A tree falls in a storm. A strange black stone glitters beneath the roots. Everything is about to change. You're standing on a slope in the English Lake District. The air smells like wet sheep and sodden moss. It's the mid-1500s, and the wind is still rattling the hedgerows after last night's storm. You squint through the drizzle, because something strange just happened. A tree has been blown clean over, its roots jutting into the gray sky like gnarled fingers. But that's not the strange part. What glitters beneath the roots isn't gold or silver. It's black, slick, heavy, almost greasy to the touch. You crouch down and pry out a chunk with your hands, staining your palms with a dusty, inky residue. You try writing with it because why not? And instantly, you leave behind a streak so dark and velvety it almost feels like magic. You've just discovered pure, solid graphite. Now, nobody's calling it graphite yet. That term won't come into popular use for centuries. What you have is something they'll call plumbago, from the Latin for acts like lead. It's an understandable mistake. It looks a little like lead, and it leaves a mark, and if there's one thing people love, it's misnaming things with confidence. But this discovery, tucked away in Borrowdale, Cumbria, isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's the moment pencils become possible, because this stuff is unusually pure. Most graphite deposits are flaky, dusty, or trapped in stone. But here, it's like a seam of black velvet running straight through the earth. Miners can literally carve out chunks of it, slice it into rods, and write with them. No processing needed. You stuff a few lumps into your pockets, but you're not the only one to notice. By the 1560s, England is fiercely protective of the Borrowdale graphite mine. Guards are stationed. Secrets are kept. The Crown even classifies the location as a military resource. Why? Because the graphite isn't just used for scribbling grocery lists. It's essential for lining cannonball molds. Yes, your innocent pencil ancestor moonlights as a defense industry asset. Historians still argue whether the British military's obsession with graphite was due more to its industrial utility or its sheer scarcity. But the effect is the same. Graphite becomes valuable. So valuable that the mine operates in strict secrecy. Workers are searched. Smuggling is rampant. At one point, miners are only allowed to dig during specific lunar phases to confuse would-be thieves. And in the quiet corners of town, craftsmen begin slicing that same graphite into neat little rods and wrapping them in string or sheepskin. Voila, an early pencil. There's no wood casing yet, but the idea is taking form. Something you can hold. Something you can write with. Something dry, portable, discreet. Now picture this. A traveling merchant arrives at a village market with a bundle of these graphite rods. People gather around, fascinated. He scrawls his name on a scrap of paper. No ink, no blotting, no mess. Just one stroke of his dusty wand. Children gape. Scholars lean in. Artists go quiet. And somewhere nearby, a monk writes in the margin of his prayer book. Must get one of these. But graphite has a problem. It's brittle, fragile. It smudges and breaks. It needs protection. So early users begin improvising. They wrap the rods in twine, or insert them into hollowed-out bits of wood, or tuck them into bone casings. It's not standardized, but it works. Here's a quirky detail. In the late 1500s, some enterprising tinkerers actually start selling graphite sticks with fancy silver holders. Luxury items for nobles who want to draw, write, or sketch without dirtying their hands. These are not your average school pencils. They're status symbols. Pocket elegance. Writing meets fashion. Meanwhile, smuggling graphite becomes a minor criminal industry. There's even a documented case of thieves tunneling under the Borrowdale mine to extract it in secret. Somewhere between Ocean's 11 and Bob the Builder. And in the midst of all this, a new type of artisan emerges. The pencil maker. Not yet a full-fledged industry, but a trade. Men who can carve graphite into rods of uniform thickness. Who understand the grain of cedar wood. Who experiment with different wrappings, bindings, even pigments. One of them, let's call him Thomas, sits by his cottage window in 1604, carefully slicing a rod of graphite, measuring it against a scrap of paper. He slides it into a split stick of wood, glues it shut and sands the edges. He hands it to you. It smells faintly of smoke and earth. Feels good in your hand. Balanced. Modest. Satisfying. You try it on a piece of parchment. It glides. And you realize, this is no longer just a rock. This is a tool. A fun side note? The earliest word for pencil in English, penicillus, comes from Latin and originally meant little tail or small brush. Not because early pencils looked like brushes, but because writing tools were so varied that anything vaguely wand-shaped got lumped into the same family. The pencil was a fuzzy-tailed oddity in a world of ink and quills. Still, something is shifting. The world is becoming faster, busier, more literate. People need ways to take notes, make lists, sketch plans, copy maps. And they need to do it without spilling ink or carrying pots. The pencil is ready, but the world needs to catch up. The wind presses gently against the old stone walls of a 17th-century workshop. Inside, it smells like wood shavings, horse glue, and the faint metallic tang of hand-forged tools. You're standing beside a workbench, and on it lies something that looks oddly familiar. Two slim halves of a cedar slat, carved out just enough to cradle a dark, delicate rod in between. With steady hands, the craftsman closes the two halves together and binds them tight. You've just witnessed the casing of the first true wooden pencil. No more string-wrapped lumps or makeshift bone holders. No more carrying graphite in cloth pouches like contraband. This neat little instrument is the pencil beginning to understand itself. But first, let's talk about the pencil's fragile heart. Pure Borrowdale graphite, while prized, is not easy to work with. Crumbles. It stains everything. It disappears if you sneeze too hard in its direction. Still, for about a century, pencils are essentially sticks of solid graphite, cut, sliced, and sometimes sharpened with knives. Artists love them. Engineers tolerate them. School children, not yet involved. Historians still argue whether the first cased pencils appeared in Germany or Italy, but the best guess lands somewhere in the early 1600s, probably in Nuremberg. German pencil makers were among the first to mass-produce what looked recognizably like modern pencils. Graphite inserted into wooden cylinders or rectangles, then glued shut and shaped into smooth hexagonal or round forms. You pick up one of these early creations. It's warm from the sun, light in your hand, and smells sweet because of the cedar. A surprising amount of thought went into choosing the right wood. Cedar was strong but soft enough to cut easily, sharpened cleanly, and it smelled wonderful. Even today, high-end pencils use California incense cedar for exactly these reasons. Back then, pencils weren't sharpened in the way we're used to. There were no crank-handle contraptions or pocket-friendly blade inserts. You'd use a small knife, often the same one used to trim quills or slice fruit, and gently carve away the wood until a sliver of graphite emerged. A little like peeling an apple with the intention of writing your name on a wall afterward. You sit beside a merchant in 1700s Paris who's selling these new wooden pencils to passers-by. He demonstrates one by sketching a little fleur-de-lis on a scrap of parchment. People gather to watch. Some buy them. Some look suspicious. A few poke the graphite, convinced it's sorcery. But most walk away with this strange new thing, tucking it into a pocket next to a coin purse or folding fan. And here's something charming. Early pencils weren't just for writing. They were for marking. Tailors used them to sketch patterns onto fabric. Carpenters scored wood. Masons left notes on stone. Artists, of course, were thrilled. Finally a way to sketch without dragging around ink pots or snapping bits of charcoal on their sleeves. But there was a problem. Borrowdale graphite, so rich and pure, began to dwindle. The good stuff was hard to come by. And without pure deposits, pencil makers needed a new strategy. So, sometime in the late 1700s, a Frenchman named Nicolas Jacques Conti had an idea. What if, instead of slicing solid graphite, you ground it into powder, mixed it with clay, and fired it in a kiln like pottery? Revolutionary, or at least very tidy. The new composite cores were more durable, less smudgy, and, crucially, could be adjusted in hardness by varying the clay ratio. Want a softer, darker pencil? Less clay. Want something harder and lighter for technical drawing? More clay. A customizable pencil core. You're now one powdered pinch away from the future of mass production. You take a moment to examine an early Conti pencil. It's elegant, balanced, less temperamental than the Borrowdale originals. Artists begin requesting specific hardnesses. Draftsmen swear by it. Pencils finally step out of the shadows of novelty and into the toolkit of professionals. One quirky tangent? In the early 1800s, some pencil makers scented their pencils, adding traces of lavender or rose oil into the wooden casing. A marketing gimmick, sure, but also oddly delightful. You could write a love letter that already smelled like it. By the mid-1800s, pencils are being produced in factories. Machines slice cedar with precision. Graphite clay cores are rolled and fired in bulk. Glue is measured, applied, pressed. Labels are stamped. Everything is uniform, dependable, sharpenable. And right on time, the pencil sharpener arrives. No, not the crank handle kind, not yet. The first pencil sharpeners were blades built into wooden blocks. You insert the pencil, twist, and hope for the best. By the 1850s, more elegant designs appear, including early mechanical sharpeners with rotating blades and spring mechanisms. People are genuinely excited. It's the 19th century equivalent of a Bluetooth-enabled air fryer. You lean over the shoulder of an American schoolchild in 1860. She's scribbling spelling words with a newly sharpened pencil, the wood spirals collecting on her desk like little curls of memory. She has no idea this object was once mined by moonlight, once used to line cannon molds, once smuggled under soldiers' coats. All she knows is that it works. The pencil has arrived. The pencil, now proudly wearing its sleek wooden jacket, starts to travel. You're walking the cobbled streets of 17th century Europe, and everywhere you go, you see merchants hawking pencils tucked neatly in leather cases, artists sketching street scenes on yellowed paper, and surveyors making quick notes with dusty black marks that vanish as fast as they appear. The pencil is no longer a curiosity, it's becoming indispensable. But here's the twist. Even as the pencil gains momentum, it's still a bit raw, rough around the edges. The graphite can still snap, the wood can splinter, and not everyone agrees on how they should look. Some pencils are round, some are square, some are flat like carpenter's pencils, designed not to roll off the workbench. The form isn't settled, but the idea is something portable, dry, and instantly legible. Then something strange happens. You find yourself amid the sounds of marching boots and clinking sabers. Europe is at war. Specifically, it's the tail end of the 18th century, and Napoleon's armies are sweeping across the continent. Supplies are tight, and guess what France doesn't have? British graphite. Because of political tensions and military blockades, France is completely cut off from the once reliable deposits of pure Borrowdale graphite. Disaster? Maybe. But for Nicolas Jacques Conti, it's the perfect opportunity. Remember him from earlier? He's about to save the pencil all over again. In a makeshift lab filled with bubbling pots and dusty shelves, Conti mixes powdered graphite with clay, bakes it in a kiln, and molds it into uniform rods. The result? A pencil core that doesn't rely on raw graphite chunks. It's tougher. It's flexible. It's reproducible. The pencil no longer needs England. Historians still argue whether Conti truly invented the modern pencil or merely improved an existing idea. But there's no doubt. His method changes everything. Suddenly, France can produce pencils independently, in massive quantities, tailored for military engineers, cartographers, and commanders who desperately need to sketch maps and write orders on the fly. You watch a French soldier crouched in a muddy trench, scribbling troop positions on a makeshift map with a Conti pencil. He tucks it behind his ear like a trusted companion. There's no ink to spill, no quill to snap. Just this small, loyal stick of black magic. It's not just the French, of course. Around this time, other countries begin refining their own pencil production methods. Factories spring up across Germany, Austria, and eventually America. Pencil making becomes its own craft, complete with trade secrets, preferred woods, and signature shapes. Here's a fun little side road. In some parts of 18th century Europe, people believed pencils had medicinal properties. Not because of the graphite, but because they were seen as calming. Holding a pencil, twisting it between your fingers, making repetitive marks. Some early physicians even recommended drawing therapy for patients with nervous conditions. You, too, might have felt it. That quiet trance you slip into while absent-mindedly sketching spirals in the margin of a notebook. Centuries ago, that might have been called treatment. Now step into an English classroom in the 1830s. The teacher is writing on a slate board with chalk, and each student is equipped with a pencil and paper. This is new, education is expanding, and literacy is rising. Pencils are cheaper than ink, safer, less messy, and easier to erase. Which, when you're 7 years old and still figuring out how to spell Wednesday, is a godsend. Of course, there's still no such thing as a rubber eraser. Not yet. Mistakes are dealt with by rubbing the writing with breadcrumbs, wax cloth, or even spittle and shirt sleeves if you're particularly daring. And let's be honest, you've probably done the modern version of that, smudging graphite with your thumb and pretending it's gone. But back to war. You're now huddled inside a 19th century tent lit by candlelight. A general is sketching strategy maps on rough parchment. His hand moves fast, but the pencil keeps up. There's no inkwell to tip over, no feather quill to sharpen. Just the clean efficiency of a tool built for thinking in motion. In fact, during the American Civil War, pencils become part of standard soldier kits. Letters home, sketchbooks, field maps, all created with these compact, reliable tools. Some soldiers carve their names into the casing. Others notch marks for every month survived. One quirky tale: a Confederate officer reportedly carried a pencil stub carved with initials from his childhood sweetheart. He never wrote with it, just kept it like a charm. War has a strange way of turning even the simplest things into symbols. As you step out of the war tent and into the bustle of post-war cities, something new is happening. Factories are producing pencils by the thousands. Brands begin to appear. Logos, fonts, decorative flourishes. Pencils are no longer plain, they're branded. One company offers pencils painted blue and red. Another wraps them in gold foil. Still another adds tiny bells. Yes, really. Tiny bells on pencils. It was a thing. Briefly. And finally, we return to an old friend. Cedar. California incense cedar becomes the wood of choice. It's strong but smooth, easy to machine, and smells like the inside of a hope chest. You walk through a California lumber mill in the 1870s. The scent rich and clean, as planks are planed, grooved, and joined around pencil cores. Workers sand them down, paint them bright colors, and stamp logos onto the side. Each pencil is like a little promise. Ready to be used, ready to make a mark, ready to disappear again with the scrape of a blade. You hold one in your hand. Sharpen it slowly with a knife. Feel the wood curl away. Hear the soft hush of graphite on paper. And just like that, you've written the first word of something important. You're standing in a cramped, sunlit room, thick with the scent of turpentine and wood shavings. There's a man hunched over a workbench, peering through thick spectacles. He dips a brush into a tiny jar, muttering to himself, and delicately paints a number on the side of a pencil. Welcome to the curious rise of the humble pencil as a status symbol in 19th century Europe. Up until now, we've mostly been in the mud and soot of invention, but in this part of the story, things take a polished turn. Think ornate lacquered casings, precious metal caps, and decorative ferrules that gleam in the lamplight. As pencils became more common and affordable, a peculiar reverse effect kicked in. The rich wanted theirs to look less common. So you're strolling down a cobbled Parisian boulevard in 1850, and you pause at a shop window. Displayed there are writing instruments, some simple, some exquisite. Among them, a slender, black pencil with golden accents and an engraved monogram. It's absurdly elegant for something whose core is just carbon and clay. This is the dawn of the pencil as luxury accessory era. And leading the charge are firms like A.W. Faber in Germany and Karen Dieck in Switzerland. These companies didn't just want to supply pencils to school kids and clerks. They wanted to be in the pockets of royalty, artists, and philosophers. A.W. Faber, in particular, understood that you weren't just selling a writing implement. You were selling precision, reliability, sophistication. So they started branding their pencils by grade, marking hardness levels with numbers like H for hard, B for black, and the now iconic HB for hard black. These little codes helped artists and architects select exactly what they needed, but they also had a sleek, almost mysterious allure. Who wouldn't want to scribble their thoughts in HB elegance? That simple grading system, by the way, still sparks confusion today. Is 2B darker than HB? What does 9H even mean? Historians still argue whether the original scale was designed with artists or engineers in mind, or whether it was just marketing brilliance disguised as utility. Meanwhile, pencil design took on flair. Casing woods were chosen for grain and polish, sometimes dyed or stained into exotic hues. Some pencils came sheathed in brass or chased silver. You'd even find retractable pencil holders with springs and twist mechanisms, early ancestors of the modern mechanical pencil, but far fancier. Now imagine you're in a Viennese cafe in 1887, and a well-dressed gentleman next to you pulls out an engraved Faber pencil, balanced perfectly in his fingers. He jots a quick note on a linen napkin, caps it with a silver sheath, and tucks it back into his waistcoat. It's a flex, subtle, but unmistakable. Meanwhile, in Japan, a different kind of craftsmanship was unfolding. Japanese pencil makers, like Tombow, founded in 1913, but their roots go back further, embraced not just precision but beauty. They lacquered pencils in deep reds and glossy blacks, finished to perfection. These weren't show-off tools. They were quiet works of art. Using one felt like meditation. You might think, okay, but weren't pencils still messy little things? They were. But that didn't stop high society from clutching them during salon debates and philosophical musings. Writers like Thomas Hardy and Virginia Woolf were known to keep pencils nearby. Artists, from Van Gogh to Picasso, wielded them as both sketch tool and security blanket. One strange aside in this world of elegance: the Victorian pencil point protector. These tiny metal sleeves slipped over the sharpened end, shielding your pocket from graphite smears. Some were plain. Others were absurdly ornate, shaped like animal heads or miniature swords. One even doubled as a whistle, just in case you wanted your pencil to double as a distress signal. But prestige didn't always mean practical. There's a rather laughable invention from the 1890s. The pencil parasol. A real umbrella-style cap for your pencil, meant to keep the point dry and dignified. Spoiler, it didn't catch on. But the fact that someone tried says everything about the era's obsession with dignity, even for stationery. And then there's the curious story of the pencil tie pin. Yes, for a time, miniature pencils were fashioned into actual jewelry. Worn like a brooch or tie bar, they could be unscrewed and used in a pinch. Fashionable and functional, a dangerous combination. Of course, while the upper crust twirled their gold-capped sketchers, factory workers and students were still gripping the humble cedar stick with gnawed ends. The pencil had begun to straddle worlds: luxury and labor, art and arithmetic. It's not so different from smartphones today. You've got the budget model with the crack screen, and you've got the titanium-finished triple-camera spaceship that costs as much as a weekend in Rome. Yet both make phone calls. The pencil had its own version of this split. But even then, no matter how fancy the casing or how intricate the monogram, it still boiled down to that quiet little streak of graphite on paper. Some writers of the time even poked fun at the trend. Satirical magazines published cartoons of men showing off their pencil holders like swordsmen brandishing rapiers. There were etiquette guides advising how not to appear too proud of your mechanical pencil. It was frankly a lot. Still, the pencil survived the era with grace. Its luxury variants faded somewhat as the 20th century approached, but the idea that a writing tool could be both precise and beautiful remained. And maybe that's the real legacy here, not the gold or the lacework caps, but the notion that something simple could still feel special. That even in the age of invention, where steam-powered trains and electric light were reshaping cities, a slender stick of graphite could earn a place in the vest pocket of a philosopher. So next time you pick up a pencil, maybe one with a pink eraser chewed beyond recognition, remember it has aristocratic ancestors. Ones that once dined in velvet pockets and whispered poetry into the margins of great ideas. You're not sure what you expected when you imagined a pencil factory. Probably more conveyor belts, maybe a few steampunk contraptions clinking and hissing in the corners, and workers in tidy uniforms stamping things in rhythm. What you get instead, at least back in the early 19th century, is a blend of artisan's shop and industrial dreamscape. Picture wide timber floors dusted in graphite, the soft clack of tools tapping into cedar slats, and a smell, woody, mineral, a little smoky, that follows you home in your hair. Because this is the birth of mass pencil manufacturing. And you're right in the thick of it. It starts with two men and a moment of perfectly sharpened timing. One is William Monroe, a Concord, Massachusetts cabinet maker with an idea. Why not carve a precise wooden holder for the graphite stick? Something smooth, slim, and uniform? He begins slicing slats of red cedar, boring neat grooves, and tucking rods of graphite inside before gluing another cedar layer over it. Voila, the very first machine-made American pencils. The other figure in our industrial ballet is Joseph Dixon. You remember Dixon, printer, tinkerer, lover of shiny machines? He throws his full eccentric might into refining the pencil-making process. And while Monroe lays the groundwork, it's Dixon who scales it into a minor empire. By the 1860s, Dixon's factory is churning out pencils by the truckload. Okay, wagon load, but don't let the numbers lull you into thinking it's all mechanical efficiency. There's something strangely tender about the early pencil-making process. Graphite is hand-ground with heavy stones, then mixed into a clay paste. This paste is carefully extruded into thin rods, almost like graphite spaghetti, then baked in kilns until they harden into durable leads. It's in these sunlit workshops, filled with sawdust motes and the constant tap of hands, that the modern pencil form emerges. Rounded hexagonal bodies, painted finishes, Soft, clicky erasers attached to the end with tiny metal ferrules. And the standard length, of course, 7.5 inches, give or take. A legacy of ease for both hand and pocket. The wood? That's mostly red cedar, which smells divine and splits like a dream. The industry quickly becomes obsessed with this tree. Whole forests of it are felled across the American South and shipped north to feed the pencil-making beast. You may never think of the phrase cedar fever the same way again. But even with these refined processes, making a pencil is still oddly intimate. Slats must be cut with exacting precision, grooves planed just deep enough, the halves glued with care so the graphite doesn't rattle inside like a loose tooth. A single slip, too much glue, not enough pressure, a temperature misstep, and the whole batch might warp or crumble. Factories begin developing internal guild-like hierarchies. You've got the lead mixers who know exactly how much moisture to leave in the clay. The kiln masters, crusted with soot and secrets. The ferrule fitters, whose fingers are permanently stained pink from working eraser ends. And yes, of course, the quality testers who get to break pencils on purpose, toss the duds, and sneak away with the best samples in their aprons. One early innovation is the development of pencil grades, the HB system. H for hardness, B for blackness. The more HS, the lighter and crisper your line. More BS? You're shading like a Renaissance master. The origin of the scale? Historians still argue whether it began in England or France. But by the time it reaches American shores, artists and engineers alike are swooning. Finally, a way to match the right pencil to the right purpose. And let's not forget the eraser. Originally, people used bits of bread. Or more alarmingly, crusts of rubber smuggled from South America and smelling faintly like burning tires. In 1858, Hyman Lipman figures out how to attach a stub of rubber directly to the end of a pencil. Revolutionary, yes. Though, spoiler, his patent is eventually invalidated because the idea was too obvious. Tell that to every student who's erased half a math test and thanked the pencil gods. As demand grows, branding becomes everything. Dixon's Ticonderoga line rises to fame with its buttery glide and iconic green ferrule. Over in Europe, brands like Stettler and Faber begin their slow pencil arms race, offering luxury finishes, gold stamping, and secret formulations so proprietary they're kept in vaults. Some factories even mix perfumes into their cedar stock. Yes, your pencil might smell like vanilla or violet if you're fancy enough. And then there's the paint. That bright yellow you know so well? It starts as a marketing gimmick. In the late 1800s, American pencil makers want to signify that their graphite comes from prestigious sources, like Austria or Siberia. So they paint their pencils yellow, associated in some cultures with royalty and luxury. The color sticks. Soon, yellow is the standard, and anything else is considered a rebel move. Even today, most U.S. school pencils wear that same cheery coat. But even with mechanization, the romance of pencil making never fully dies. The process remains slow, temperamental, lovingly imperfect. To make one pencil takes more than 80 precise steps. 80. Just imagine. By the time you bite the end of one during a tough crossword, it has already passed through dozens of hands and machines, each with their own rituals, failures, and small victories. And there's something else, a kind of whisper behind all this production. Pencils aren't just tools, they're promises. Each one holds the silent potential of a poem, a blueprint, a half-finished doodle in a school notebook. They're blank scrolls waiting for you to leave a mark. You glance down and imagine one being made just for you. Cedar whittled, graphite smoothed, ferrule crimped, yellow paint drying in slow, glossy drips. That one pencil you'll forget in a coat pocket, or sharpen until it's just a stub and toss away without a second thought. But somewhere along its little wooden journey, it mattered. And that factory hum continues, a sleepy rhythm of shavings and steam and soft, carbon black lines waiting to be drawn. The air around you feels a little heavier now, not in a gloomy way, but in the way that comes from getting closer to something familiar, something almost mundane, like a childhood toy rediscovered in a drawer, or the first bite of a peanut butter sandwich after a long day. You're no longer drifting through royal courts or rubbing elbows with Renaissance inventors. Instead, you're back in the humble dust of workshops and classrooms, right where the pencil quietly rose to full power. You're standing in a small, slightly musty 19th century general store. There's a squeak of floorboards beneath your feet. Shelves stacked high with barrels of nails, glass jars filled with licorice and barley sugar, soap cut into blocks with string, and near the back, tucked behind a display of linseed oil and horsehair brushes, there's a simple box of something new. American pencils. Machine-made, factory-smoothed, and ready for a world about to need a lot of writing. Welcome to the golden age of mass production. It begins in places like Concord, Massachusetts. That's where, in the 1820s, a man named William Monroe, yes, with an E, began producing pencils using a lathe. Not for fun, not for art. For business. He wasn't the first American to make pencils, but he's credited with setting up the first American pencil manufacturing operation. And it matters, because for the first time in the U.S., pencils weren't being carved one by local craftsmen. They were coming off machines. Standard shapes. Predictable quality. A line you could rely on. And in this world of steam engines, textile mills, and the telegraph, predictability meant power. As the 19th century crept on, pencils needed more than smooth wood. They needed guts. The graphite. The core. It still came from mines in Europe, especially from a bustling German pencil town named Nuremberg. There, a family name was rising, Faber. A W. Faber. Probably rings a bell. It should. If you've ever scribbled on a receipt with a yellow pencil that had a faint, respectable German ring to its name, you might be using a descendant of Faber's legacy. The Fabers did what any good industrialists would do. They scaled. Factories, global export, branding, and, crucially, a whole system of pencil grading. That's right, the first real attempts to tell you whether a pencil was hard H, soft B, or somewhere in between came from this time. But here's the cheeky bit. There was never any international agreement. One maker's HB might be another's 2B, or even just a plain number 2. Historians still argue whether the HB/number 2 divide was ever meant to reflect scientific precision, or just marketing vibes. You can almost imagine some marketing assistant in 1874 going, let's just call it a 2. People like 2s. Back in America, something else was happening. Factories popped up in New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania. Graphite was found in places like Ticonderoga, yes, that Ticonderoga, and companies with names like Dixon sprang into being. You've probably held a Dixon Ticonderoga in your life. Yellow body, pink eraser, green and gold band. That pencil is basically the Beyoncé of school supplies. The Dixon Company was founded by a man named Joseph Dixon, who was a printer and inventor. He loved graphite. Not just for writing, he used it in crucibles, lubricants, batteries, and yes, pencils. During the Civil War, Dixon's graphite-based items became crucial. Fun fact: his pencils were distributed to soldiers. Imagine being out on a battlefield and jotting something home on a crumpled envelope with a Dixon number 2. Suddenly, graphite isn't just clever, it's patriotic. And the eraser? That sneaky pink tip you love to bite or nervously peel during exams. The 1850s and 60s made that possible. A guy named Hyman Lipman, yes, that's his real name, patented the first pencil with an eraser attached. Now, historians still debate whether his patent was really valid. Some argue that just gluing two pre-existing things together doesn't count as invention. But Lipman tried. He sold the patent for $100,000, which in modern dollars is enough to buy, say, a small Tesla or a lot of tacos. Meanwhile, the pencils themselves were becoming recognizable. Rounded or hexagonal wooden casings. A thin coat of varnish. Painted in increasingly flashy colors, mostly yellow. But why yellow? Glad you asked. Yellow was chosen by companies like Koh-i-Noor, another European manufacturer, to signal that their pencils used premium graphite, often from China. Yellow, you see, was associated with royalty in Chinese symbolism. So making your pencil yellow was like saying, hey, this graphite, fancy, regal, imported. Over time, it just stuck. Even though today, the graphite probably doesn't come from China. And even if it did, the symbolism's long lost to most of us. Yellow pencils remain the standard. Tradition by inertia. But what of the humble worker making these pencils? Or the machines behind them? The industrial process is strangely soothing. Take cedar wood, chosen for its softness and durability. Mill it into slats. Groove each slat with a channel down the middle. Lay graphite cores in the grooves. Add a second slat on top. Glue, clamp, shape, varnish. Stamp the name. Add the eraser. Box them up. Ship them out. Thousands per day. Millions per year. You, lying there listening, may never have thought about all this. The smell of a fresh sharpened pencil? That's cedar and lacquer and nostalgia. The sound of graphite scratching? That's pressure, friction, and carbon molecules rearranging on paper. And every time you erase a mistake, you're participating in a 19th century dream of efficiency, portability, and personal control. There's something intimate in it, don't you think? A pencil is both industrial and personal. It's manufactured by the millions, but it carries your exact grip, your pressure, your angle. It doesn't beep, buzz, or track you. It won't autocorrect your spelling or predict your next word. It's just there, quiet, ready. Of course, this mass production wasn't all smooth sailing. Factories in the 1800s were loud, hot, and dangerous. Graphite dust filled the air, and working-class children were often employed in assembly. That sweet cedar scent? Inhaled all day by people who had no choice. Historians still discuss whether the pencil industry was a net force for education or exploitation during this boom. It gave millions the tools to learn, but also relied on the kind of labor we'd never tolerate today. And yet, the pencil kept rolling forward. Into offices, into courtrooms, onto battlefields and into sketchbooks. It became both a weapon and a whisper. It drafted treaties. It filled test bubbles. It doodled in the margins of great American novels. And through it all, it remained silent. No fanfare, no blinking lights, just carbon, clay, and cedar doing their best to help humans think things through. The industrial era had given the pencil its shape. But soon, the 20th century would give it a job title. The year is 1800, give or take. You're standing at a crossroads. Figuratively, sure, but also literally, because this era is one big jumble of rutted roads, muddy paths, and booming cities that feel like they're expanding faster than anyone can chart. Smoke curls from chimneys. Horse hooves echo off cobblestone. And tucked away in workshops that smell of wood shavings, linseed oil, and the warm sweetness of sawdust. The Industrial Revolution is chewing through old traditions and spitting out new tools. And one of those tools? The humble, dependable, suddenly mass-producible pencil. By now, you're not surprised that pencils are older than most people think. But what might surprise you is how late they actually became commonplace. For centuries, the pencil was more like a luxury gadget, yes. Really, most folks couldn't afford one, and if they could, they were probably too busy plowing fields or spinning thread to be doodling in the margins of their journals. But the world was changing fast. Machines were replacing human hands, cities were filling with workers and schoolchildren, and literacy was quietly becoming less of a luxury and more of a civic expectation. Enter Henry David Thoreau. Yes, the guy who wandered into the woods to live deliberately. But before he was meditating beside a pond, he was knee-deep in pencil dust. Literally. His father ran a pencil-making business in Concord, Massachusetts. Young Thoreau, the philosopher in training, was also something of a tinkerer. He figured out how to refine the family's graphite using clay and heat, borrowing from a secret German method and giving it a uniquely American twist. The result? A smoother, stronger pencil that didn't smudge as much. Not bad for a guy who preferred trees to people. Historians still argue whether Thoreau truly revolutionized the American pencil, or whether he was just really good at marketing. But either way, the Thoreaus made the kind of pencil you'd actually want to write with, not just sketch with or jab into a door to keep it open. And the timing? Couldn't have been better. Factories were cranking out desks and bookshelves. Schools were multiplying like rabbits. And governments, those notoriously paperwork-loving entities, needed an army of clerks to take notes, tally numbers, and keep records that wouldn't fade or smear in the rain. Ink was still the mainstay, but ink was also a bit unforgiving. You spill it, it's gone. You sneeze mid-sentence. Good luck cleaning that blot. But a pencil? Pencil forgave you. Pencil waited. A pencil said, "Make a mistake. I'm right here with my eraser buddy, ready to help." Speaking of erasers, let's talk about that pink miracle. Before the late 1700s, people mostly erased pencil marks using bread. Not a joke. Soft, white bread, preferably a little stale. You'd knead it into a lump and rub it over the page like a sponge. It worked surprisingly well, but had a couple of major downsides. It left crumbs, attracted bugs, and, oh yes, sometimes molded. Then came Edward Nairn, a British engineer who, in 1770, grabbed a piece of rubber by mistake instead of a bread wad and found it worked even better. He promptly sold this newfangled rubber as an erasing tool. The name stuck, sort of. In England, rubber means eraser. In America, well, let's just say if you ask someone for a rubber in class, you might get a very different reaction. Rubber erasers were quickly attached to the ends of pencils, sometimes poorly glued, sometimes with those little metal ferrules we still use today. Not everyone loved the combo at first. Some purists insisted erasers made students lazy. But others, perhaps those of us with messy handwriting and commitment issues, rejoiced. By the mid-19th century, pencil manufacturing was no longer a family side hustle thing. It was a full-blown industry. In Germany, companies like Faber, later Stettler, and others were turning out polished cedar beauties by the boatload. In America, Joseph Dixon's Crucible Company started mass-producing pencils for everything from sketching to surveying. Dixon himself had a flair for business and claimed to have produced the first machine-made American pencil. Though, as always, historians still argue about who really got there first. What's certain is that these pencils were made fast, made cheap, and made consistent. That last part was key. Before machines, pencil quality varied wildly. One pencil might be rich and smooth, the next might scratch like a chicken's toenail. But mechanization brought precision. Graphite and clay were blended with care, kiln-fired to the exact right hardness, and slotted into hexagonal cedar slats, because round pencils roll off desks, and we've all lost at least one to the floor gods. You walk through a workshop in your mind now. It's warm, alive with the whir of saws and the hiss of steam. Men and women sort slats, pour clay graphite paste into molds, clamp the halves shut, and run the finished product through a polishing wheel until it shines. It's the sound of writing made tangible. And speaking of writing, guess who was buying all these pencils? Everyone. Students, engineers, bookkeepers, architects, tailors, journalists, spies. Yes, spies. Pencils didn't leak, didn't freeze, and you could sharpen them on a rock if needed. Portable, disposable, silent. Perfect for scribbling encrypted messages on the fly. You could even hollow one out and hide things inside. A tiny map, a sliver of film, a poison pill. Just in case. And in some corners of the world, pencil making took on almost religious importance. In Japan, for example, the craft became art. Companies like Mitsubishi and Tombow began producing high-end pencils with the same meticulous attention they gave to swords and ceramics. Even today, a Japanese HB pencil feels like writing with silk dipped in magic. Back in the West, pencils were multiplying like rabbits. Advertising pencils, carpenter pencils, surveyor pencils with squared-off bodies that wouldn't roll away mid-measurement. Golf pencils, those stubby little guys who never get the respect they deserve. And then, as if summoned by collective will, there came the iconic yellow pencil. But wait, not yet. That's the next part of our sleepy little saga. You rest your imaginary elbows on a well-used drafting table. Beside you, an old pencil lies on its side. Not flashy, not loud, just honest. A tool made for clarity, made for ideas, made for hands that wanted to mark the world. And maybe erase a bit of it, too. You're sitting at a simple desk again, perhaps in a sunny attic or a quiet corner of a library, a pencil in hand. The shavings spiral into soft curls at your side. And in this moment, just you and the graphite, you're sharing something deep with generations of artists and architects who've also reached for the pencil not just as a tool, but as a partner in dreaming. Because here's where our sleepy journey tilts toward the artistic. The sketchers, the draftsmen, the designers, the doodlers. The pencil isn't just practical. It's profoundly poetic. During the Renaissance, drawing was considered essential training for painters. And the pencil, well, it became an ideal companion. Before the graphite pencil took hold, artists used chalks or silver point, which weren't nearly as forgiving. But now, suddenly, you could sketch and smudge, revise and erase. The pencil invited experimentation. The great Leonardo himself, though he mostly used ink and metal point, might have marveled at a tool that allowed so much rethinking. You would have made a fine apprentice, patiently sharpening a handful of them while squinting up at flying buttresses. By the 1700s and 1800s, the pencil had become deeply entwined with architectural drafting. Every cathedral's elegant arch, every city square, every symmetrical blueprint for a palace. Those began in gentle gray lines. Artists loved the pencil for its softness and subtlety. Draftsmen cherished it for precision. And school children? They loved it for how easy it was to fake math homework. Historians still argue whether the pencil or pen truly dominated early art classrooms, especially in France. Some say ink was king, all sharp lines and permanence. Others suggest the pencil, quiet, cheap, and humble, was the true master. Either way, it stuck around. And then came the Romantics, those broody souls who wandered through moors and melancholy. They didn't just write poetry, they drew small sketches of trees, ruins, lovers with faraway eyes. If you've ever scribbled an absent-minded swirl in the margin of your notebook, congratulations. You've joined their ranks. The industrial age brought more art into more hands. Factory workers had evenings off. Middle-class families bought sketchbooks. A pencil tucked behind your ear meant you were ready to think, draw, solve, or imagine. And don't forget the engineers. Their bridges, trains, and turbines began as graphite scratches on tracing paper. Every engine hummed first as a doodle. Want a truly quirky tidbit? In the 1930s, American cartoonist George Harriman, creator of Crazy Cat, insisted on drawing his strips entirely in pencil, even after inking became standard. He felt pencils had more soul. And honestly, if your main characters are a brick-throwing mouse and a lovesick cat, it's nice to keep things soft around the edges. The 20th century brought us the surrealists, the futurists, the modernists, all wielding pencils in new, sometimes bewildering ways. Picasso and Moreau, doodling like possessed toddlers. Architects like Frank Lloyd Wright drafting wild, zigzagging homes that looked like they were daring gravity to argue. And always, the pencil was there. Modest, unassuming, but crucial. Ever wonder why so many animators start with blue pencils? It's because non-photo blue doesn't show up in photocopies or scans, making it perfect for sketching guidelines. If you've seen a classic Disney character in motion, Bambi slipping on ice or Dumbo flapping uncertain ears, it started in pencil. Literally thousands of hand-drawn frames. Imagine the wrist cramps. Speaking of which, pencil calluses, the badge of honor for artists and designers. That little bump on your finger? It's a quiet tribute to countless hours of dreaming, sketching, erasing, and trying again. You've probably got one too. And then there's the eraser, a humble sidekick, but deeply symbolic. Unlike ink, which scolds you for every mistake, the pencil offers a quiet do-over. That's part of its magic. It's forgiveness. Sketch something ugly? Try again. Build a crooked tower? Straighten it. Draw your crush with weird eyebrows? No one has to know. The pencil teaches impermanence and patience. It reminds you that even great cathedrals begin in smudgy lines. Artists also appreciated the pencil's stealth. You could carry one into a museum and sketch unnoticed. Soldiers in World War II tucked them into uniform pockets, drawing trenches, enemies, and longing faces back home. Artists behind barbed wire scratched hope into scraps. No electricity, no pigments, just graphite and grit. There's a beautiful anonymity to pencil sketches. Unlike oil paintings that hang in gilded frames, pencil drawings often live in the margins. In notebooks, journals, napkins. They're intimate, almost secret. Maybe that's why they feel so human. And don't forget kids. Crayons may get the spotlight, but pencils are where most of us start. First letters. First houses with chimneys. First monsters. The shaky line of a 5-year-old's dragon is just as valid an artistic statement as a Van Gogh sunflower. Maybe even more honest. Today, you'll still find artists fiercely loyal to pencils. Hyper-realist drawings that look like photographs? Those are pencil. You can spend hours watching time-lapse videos of hands rendering a single eyelash. ASMR fans adore pencil sounds. The soft scratch, the satisfying zip of a sharpener, the hiss of shading. You probably didn't expect the pencil to be an audio experience, but here we are. And let's be honest, pencil art has another perk. It's really fun to blow the eraser dust off the page like some smug little wizard. Still, the pencil's role in art isn't just practical. It's philosophical. It's the belief that nothing is fixed, that ideas can change, that lines can be moved, that creativity doesn't have to be perfect on the first try. So here we are, gliding quietly through centuries of graphite dreams. You alone in your dim room. Maybe your fingers twitch slightly, remembering the last time you sketched a lazy spiral on a notepad. Maybe you're inspired to pick one up tomorrow. Or maybe not. Because tonight, there's nothing to do but drift gently through the gallery of sleepy drawings, where every line, no matter how rough, matters, and where the pencil, silent and steadfast, waits patiently on the nightstand for whatever dreams you choose to sketch next. You settle deeper into the folds of sleep, lulled by the rhythm of invention and reinvention. But as the pencil continues its quiet march through the ages, it begins to shape something a little different now. Not just documents or mathematical proofs, but souls and imaginations. Because here's a twist you might not have expected. The pencil becomes art's quiet champion. You're in a dimly lit studio. The window panes sweat faint daylight, and the air smells like turpentine and graphite. There's a quiet scratching, slow, deliberate. The drag of a pencil across textured paper. You glance down, and under your fingers blooms a soft, powdery shadow. The beginnings of a face, or a tree, or an idea. This is the new life of the pencil. Not a tool of bureaucracy, but of expression. The 19th century, with all its clanking industry and social churn, had a secret softness to it. While the steam engine roared and factories belched smoke, artists turned quietly to pencils. You might think of painters with brushes or sculptors with chisels, but the humble graphite stick had its own renaissance, becoming the sketching tool of choice from London to Kyoto. Artists like Delacroix and Ingres filled books with graphite figure studies. And if you've ever stared into the soft stare of a Daumier drawing and wondered how something so gentle could feel so heavy, well, that's the pencil at work. One fascinating figure in this shift was Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. He might be known for his oil portraits, but those swooping lines, those cheekbones, those furrowed brows, were first captured in pencil. And in fact, some of his sketchbooks are now more admired than his paintings. There's something whisperingly intimate about pencil work. Feels closer, less performed. You watch a sketch unfold. Hasty crosshatches forming a dress, then a hand, a mouth. Artists often said they felt freer with pencil. Less pressure to be perfect. Just graphite and grit. You might relate to that. Somehow, a pencil feels like permission to explore without judgment. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American artists were filling up with graphite energy too. Winslow Homer, with his field drawings from the Civil War, used pencil not just for speed but for soul. His pencil sketches seemed to tremble with emotion. Soldiers slouched in exhaustion, faces caught between youth and trauma. And while oils were polished and planned, pencil sketches let the raw seep through. But artists weren't the only ones turning to pencils. Architects, designers, fashion illustrators, all began their process with a sharpened stub of wood. Even the Eiffel Tower began its life as a few faint graphite lines on vellum. In Japan, pencils slipped into the hands of woodblock artists too. You might be surprised to know that by the late 1800s, Japanese artists were combining traditional brush techniques with Western pencil sketching methods, creating a hybrid form that pulsed with new energy. The Meiji era saw a burst of experimentation, and the pencil, despite its foreign origins, was adopted with enthusiasm. In fact, Mitsubishi, Yes, the car company started making pencils back in 1887 under the name Mitsubishi Pencil Company. That little fact might make you look at your HB a bit differently. Historians still debate whether pencil drawing became more respected in the 19th century because of its practicality or because of its emotional impact. On one hand, it was faster and cheaper than oil, but on the other, it was more personal. A sketch is a whisper compared to a painting's shout. And in a century grappling with revolutions, war, and shifting identity, people were ready for whispers. The pencil also made its way into education, not just for writing, but for art instruction. Drawing classes multiplied across Europe and the US, and while many began as a method to teach technical skills, they often ended up unlocking creativity. Even factory workers and domestic servants were sometimes offered drawing classes, considered a civilizing influence. A pencil could lift a person out of their station at least for an hour. But it wasn't all idealism and artistry. The pencil's rise in art had its critics, too. Some called it lazy, impermanent. Pencil drawings smudged, faded, lacked the grandeur of oil or marble. But that very fragility became its allure. There's something romantic about a medium that refuses permanence. And let's not forget the notebooks. Leonardo may have been first, but the 19th century belonged to the sketchbook. Artists carried them everywhere, on trains, into fields, up mountains. You imagine one now. Soft leather cover, corners worn down, and inside, pages filled with hands, cats, clouds, faces, buildings, ideas. A whole interior world made visible through graphite. We often think of technology as fast and glossy. But in the 19th century, the pencil was its own kind of technology, quiet, analog, infinite in its possibility. It didn't beep or glow. It just waited. And when held by the right hands, it created empires of the imagination. Quirkier still, some artists swore by using pencil stubs only an inch long. Superstition? Maybe. Or perhaps it was just comfort. The way the tool curved into the fingers, familiar as a secret. And in case you're wondering, yes, artists still used erasers, but sparingly. Often, they'd rather work with the mistake than rub it away. Which is kind of beautiful when you think about it. The mark you didn't mean becomes the texture of the thing. The smudge becomes the shadow. By the turn of the century, the pencil had become more than a tool. It was a passport into the personal. Whether in Paris or Osaka, in notebooks or napkins, it gave people permission to see, to think, to create, without needing to be brilliant or perfect. So now, as the page in front of you slowly fills with loops and lines, with dreams and doodles, you realize the pencil is no longer just a writing tool. It's a mirror, and what it reflects, well, that's entirely up to you. Your fingers pause on the pencil for a moment, just long enough to wonder who might have used it last. A student? An architect? A doodler in a waiting room sketching stars and spiral galaxies on the edge of a prescription pad? You shift in your seat slightly, lulled by the soft background hum and the quiet tick of history moving forward. Tonight, that history carries you into the classroom, into the rows of wooden desks, chalkboards, and sharpeners bolted to the walls. Because now, the pencil becomes a companion not just to creators and inventors, but to generations of students shaped by its quiet, erasable persistence. Welcome to the rise of education. Specifically, the explosion of public schooling and how the humble pencil helped build entire nations of thinkers. Sometimes one scribbled multiplication table at a time. Let's begin with the Industrial Revolution. Not the factories this time, but the children. The 19th century brought mandatory schooling laws across Europe and North America. Suddenly, millions of kids needed writing tools that were cheap, portable, durable, and quiet. Quills and inkwells? Messy and prone to blotting. Pens? Still expensive and delicate. But pencils? Pencils were perfect. You, sitting at a desk in a 1910 American schoolhouse, might have a slate for quick notes, but when it came to practicing handwriting, solving math problems, or copying out long passages, it was pencil all the way. And don't think this was just a Western trend. By the mid-20th century, classrooms in Japan, Brazil, Ghana, and India had made pencils a staple, to each country adjusting its education system and pencil preferences along the way. There's a curious phenomenon that happens once the pencil becomes routine. You stop thinking about it. You chew on it absent-mindedly while trying to remember which U.S. president followed Coolidge. You tap it nervously before a test. You snap it in half in frustration, then borrow your neighbor's. It disappears into the collective memory of school days, right alongside lunch boxes and the smell of erasers. But underneath that forgettable facade lies something quietly revolutionary. Accessibility. Pencils enabled anyone, rich, poor, rural, urban, to write. Historians still argue whether the explosion of affordable writing tools had more impact on literacy than formal curriculum itself. Because it wasn't just being taught to read and write. It was being able to practice those skills endlessly, erase the mistakes, and try again. That's where the pencil quietly shone. Of course, pencils weren't alone in the classroom. Chalk was the true monarch of front-of-class instruction, especially in the 1800s. But it was the pencil that democratized feedback. A teacher could make corrections in the margin with a red pencil. A student could erase and revise a sentence. And, perhaps most importantly, those same students could keep their work, carry it home, reread it, build on it. That permanence, that sense of ownership was everything. There's even a delightful side note here. In 1858, a New Yorker named Hyman Lipman patented a pencil with an eraser attached to the end. You know, the kind you've probably chewed until it's flat and gray. It was a small but symbolic innovation, one that perfectly embodied the learning process. Write, fail, correct, repeat. The pencil wasn't just a writing tool anymore. It was a feedback loop. Meanwhile, manufacturers began to specialize for students. Ticonderoga's iconic yellow pencils, bright, confident, and topped with a pink eraser, became a classroom staple in the U.S. In the Soviet Union, school pencils were often stamped with numbers denoting hardness and quality. In post-war Japan, pencil production became an art form, with brands like Mitsubishi and Tombow catering to a culture that revered writing precision. Here's a little-known quirk. In the 20th century, some U.S. schools banned mechanical pencils. Why? Because students kept clicking them distractingly during exams. A small reminder that even in eras of mass conformity, the way you use your pencil still said something about you. But education wasn't just about formal learning. Pencils also became tools of rebellion. Prisoners wrote protest poetry in margins of textbooks. Children doodled dreams in the backs of test booklets. In 1960s America, student activists sketched out rally signs in lead before painting them in poster ink. And in apartheid-era South Africa, pencils were quietly passed between students sharing banned political texts. Historians still debate whether the pencil's affordability contributed to the global standardization of education or whether it simply adapted to it. But there's little doubt that its simplicity helped fuel literacy booms in emerging nations, especially where typewriters and ballpoints were too costly. Even the act of holding a pencil became part of education. You might remember being taught to grip it with a precise triangle of fingers. In some countries, handwriting was a graded subject. In others, the pencils were pattern revealed to teachers whether a student was practicing at home. It wasn't just a tool, it was evidence of effort. And then came the tests. The multiple-choice exam, birthed in the early 20th century, gave pencils yet another role. Scantron Buddy. Those number 2 pencils, with graphite soft enough to be machine-readable but firm enough not to smudge, became synonymous with standardized testing. A tool of assessment, a symbol of academic anxiety, a quiet partner during moments of deep concentration and shallow breathing. But for every student tapping a pencil during finals, there was another sketching rocket ships on the inside of a notebook. Pencils made room for imagination, even within the most structured systems. And when they broke, you learned to adapt. Borrow a sharpener, ask for a spare, find a stub in the bottom of your backpack and squeeze out one more line. You might wonder, with all our tablets and styluses and digital keyboards, does the pencil still have a place in the modern classroom? The answer, oddly enough, is yes. Many educators still recommend pencils for early learners. It helps develop motor skills and encourages mistake-making. In an era of autosave and autocorrect, the pencil's gentle impermanence is oddly comforting. You can erase and start again, quietly, privately, like whispering to yourself, Let me try that one more time. So tonight, as you lay back and remember those rows of desks, the scratch of lead against ruled paper, the smell of fresh shavings from a tiny metal sharpener, you realize the pencil wasn't just a writing tool. It was a rite of passage, patient tutor, a steady friend through the chaos of growing up. And as we ease toward our next chapter, we're not leaving the pencil behind. We're just watching it evolve, sharpened by learning, shaped by countless hands, and quietly waiting to write the next lesson. You're walking now through the back rooms of a factory. Loud, clunky machines humming around you, men and women in aprons bent over conveyor belts, their hands moving rhythmically, always in time with the whir of production. The smell of wood dust and graphite still hangs in the air, but something else seeps in too. Automation. The cold tick of a mechanical clock. And in that tick, a whisper of disruption. Because this is the era when pencils stop being quaint little tools and start becoming big business. We're in the mid-20th century now, just in time for pencils to find themselves tangled in two very different worlds. The bureaucratic maze of mass production and the messy inkblot of Cold War politics. Which, admittedly, is more drama than you'd expect from a pencil. But here we are. Let's talk numbers first. By the 1950s, the American pencil industry is pumping out over 1 billion pencils a year. Yes, with a B. Billion. The factories that once lovingly sanded cedar by hand are now entire ecosystems of automation. One machine slices wood into thin slats, another drills the graphite groove, another sandwiches it all together. You don't see a craftsman anymore, you see a technician with a clipboard. The golden age of branding is in full swing, too. Yellow isn't the only pencil color anymore. We've got rich blues, fresh greens, soft creams. Each one trying to elbow its way into the hearts of students, secretaries, and sketch artists alike. Pencil tins become miniature billboards, boasting slogans like, "Writes first time, every time," and "The artist's choice." And somewhere, someone invents a pencil with a scented eraser. It is, in short, a bit of a circus. But the pencil has also become a quiet partner in much larger dramas. Let's pause for a moment and zoom in on something both absurd and entirely real. The space pen debate. Picture this 1960s America. NASA is gearing up to send people into space. There's this rumor, still whispered today with great sarcasm, that the US government spent millions developing a pen that could write in zero gravity. Meanwhile, the Soviets? They just brought pencils. It's not quite true. Pencils pose fire hazards in oxygen-rich spacecraft. But the myth sticks, probably because it's so satisfying. The pencil, again, becomes the scrappy underdog in a tale of overcomplicated solutions. Whether in a schoolroom or an orbital capsule, it never needs to be recharged. Back on Earth, the Cold War casts a long shadow over education. American classrooms become battlegrounds for ideological superiority. More math, more science, more homework, more standardized testing. And what do kids clutch in their sweaty palms as they bubble in their futures? That's right, the number 2 pencil. Yes, we need to talk about that mysterious number 2 designation. It refers to hardness, specifically the graphite-to-clay ratio in the pencil's core. Number 1 is softer and darker. Number 3 is harder and lighter. Number 2, it's the Goldilocks zone. Just dark enough to register on scant-drawn sheets, but not so soft that it smudges into oblivion. There is an entire subculture of pencil fanatics who will debate the merits of a number 1 over a number 2 the way sommeliers debate Merlot. These people exist. They write blogs. They attend pencil conventions. And yes, you're allowed to gently giggle at that. But what's more interesting is how pencils, humble, wooden, everyday objects, end up tangled in the machinery of identity. Your pencil could say something about you. A pink triangle eraser? You were probably a doodler. A mechanical pencil with a rubber grip? Fancy. The person with the chewed-up yellow Dixon? Probably forgot their homework again. By the 1970s, the number of pencil brands had exploded. The Eberhard Faber Blackwing 602 had become legendary among writers and composers. It was said to write with half the pressure, twice the speed. A tagline that made it sound more like a sports car than a pencil. Steinbeck swore by them. So did Chuck Jones, the animator behind Bugs Bunny. Entire crates of Blackwings disappeared into Hollywood studio lots and editors' desks. When the Blackwing was discontinued in 1998, people mourned. Truly, prices soared on eBay. Hoarders revealed dusty drawers filled with their final sacred stashes. This wasn't just a pencil anymore. It was a cultural relic. Meanwhile, across oceans, Japanese pencils rose in quiet supremacy. Sleek, precise, artfully balanced, brands like Mitsubishi and Tombow began turning heads, especially among artists and designers. Their pencils were smoother, darker, finer. Engineers loved them. Architects praised their line fidelity. Graphic novelists hoarded them in leather rolls. Even now, if you wander into a stationery shop in Tokyo, you'll find entire walls of pencils categorized by softness, point retention, scent, aesthetic. Some come wrapped in silk paper. Others are lacquered like fine chopsticks. One store even offers pencil tasting experiences, where you can try different pencils before committing to a purchase. And yet, despite all this evolution, the core hasn't changed. Wood, graphite, eraser, your fingers cradling it like a wand. The quiet scratch on paper. The light dust of a mistake undone. And speaking of mistakes, let's pause to honor the eraser. For centuries, people used bread. Literally. White bread. Balled up and needed to lift graphite off parchment. Eventually, natural rubber took over. In 1858, Hyman Lipman patented the first pencil with a built-in eraser and was promptly challenged in court for merging two inventions. Historians still argue whether this was innovation or mere convenience. But for every student who's rubbed a mistake into oblivion during a test, it probably feels like the latter. Now, here's a lovely little fringe tidbit for you. In the 1970s, a company tried making edible erasers, fruit-flavored, shaped like strawberries and oranges, marketed to kids. They didn't work particularly well, but they smelled great, and enough children bit into them that lawsuits loomed. Another quiet revolution? The rise of recycled pencils. Sawdust mixed with resin. Old newspapers rolled into tight cylinders. Even denim scraps and coffee grounds pressed into usable form. In a century already drowning in waste, the pencil becomes a tiny beacon of sustainability. Quietly, persistently, still doing its job. You begin to realize that the pencil is no longer just a tool. It's a survivor, a shapeshifter. It's been aristocrat and pauper, artist and bureaucrat, astronaut and test taker. It has been mass-produced and handmade, loved and forgotten, swallowed by couch cushions and rescued from junk drawers. And as you walk out of the factory's back door, its red exit sign humming faintly behind you, you start to understand. It's not going anywhere. Not yet. Not ever, really. You trace your finger along the wooden shaft, the familiar hexagonal shape gently nudging the pad of your thumb. It's the pencil. Still with us, after millennia of transformation, debate, worship, replacement, and quiet survival. And now, as you sink deeper into the cocoon of your blankets, we reach the modern era, when the pencil is no longer just a tool, but a cultural artifact. By the late 20th century, you're watching the rise of sleek computers and blinking cursors. The clatter of keys begins to replace the scratch of graphite on paper. And yet, pencils linger. Why? Partly habit, partly nostalgia. And maybe because nothing else feels quite like dragging a point of carbon across a page and leaving behind a trail of your thinking. But pencils don't merely coast on familiarity. In the 1990s and early 2000s, a curious movement rises. The retro revival. Suddenly, you see artists, illustrators, and calligraphy fans championing analog tools. Moleskine notebooks and sharpeners make a comeback. You walk into cafes where people are sketching in the margins of their books again. Is it rebellion? Is it comfort? Or just the craving for tactile feedback in a digital world? Historians still debate whether this analog affection is sustainable or simply a passing fad. But the pencil, true to its roots, doesn't fuss. It just waits quietly in your drawer, in the bottom of your bag, or tucked behind your ear, content to serve when called. In schools, despite tablets and laptops, Number 2, pencils still line desks on testing day. They've become symbolic now, not just of eras past, but of effort, of preparation, of showing your work in a world of multiple choice. And you might chuckle, but even in the age of spaceflight and quantum computing, NASA, continued using mechanical pencils on missions well into the 21st century. Why? Because graphite leaves a clear mark in microgravity. Pens, on the other hand, are temperamental drama queens about pressure and orientation. So, you see, even in space, there's room for graphite. Culturally, the pencil also continues its cameo career in films, branding, art installations, and yes, even YouTube videos like this one. Some pencils are absurdly luxurious, sold in hand-carved rosewood boxes, tipped with Swarovski crystals. Others are charity projects, made from recycled newspapers or old jeans. Then there's the pencil's cousin, the stylus. It's digital now, but it traces its ancestry directly back to those ancient graphite sticks. When you swipe an Apple Pencil across your iPad, you're echoing an Egyptian scribe who pressed a reed into wet clay. The form shifts, but the impulse stays the same. You want to leave a trace. You want to see thought become shape. Quirky fact for tonight, there's a museum in Germany dedicated entirely to the pencil. Shelves upon shelves of writing implements, historic advertising, obscure prototypes, and a wall-sized mural made entirely of pencil shavings. It's absurd. It's delightful. It's real. And just before you drift off, a final curious whisper. The world's longest pencil stretches nearly 460 meters, long enough to outline 4 football fields. It's utterly useless as a writing instrument, but perhaps that's the point. It honors not practicality, but legacy. So here we are. You began this journey with a humble stick of carbon, and now you're staring at a tool that spanned millennia, crossed oceans, survived revolutions, inspired inventions, and even gone to space. You didn't survive the pencil age, but the pencil did. And now it waits quietly in your drawer. Until next time. And now, wrapped in the hush of night, your eyes growing heavier with each breath, let the story of the pencil soften into silence. You've wandered through dark graphite mines beneath German hills, stepped into the sunlit shops of Renaissance artisans, lingered in factories thick with cedar shavings, and floated beside astronauts tracing calculations in the stillness of orbit. All from the comfort of your bed. Because history isn't just a list of dates. It's a trail of fingerprints, of quiet inventions that outlast empires, of objects so ordinary they become invisible, until you look closer. Tonight you looked closer, and as you drift into sleep, the world you carry with you, the world of ideas, sketches, formulas, thoughts, is just a reach away. Maybe in the drawer beside your bed, maybe behind your ear, or maybe still pressed between the pages of that old notebook you haven't opened in years. Good night, quiet thinker. Sleep well. We'll be here next time with another tale from the boring histories of the world, where even pencils can tell stories worth whispering.